Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today we are not just talking about Dire Alliance Horror, the board game, but we are also talking about the Blacklist miniature series, specifically Horror Series 1. If you don't know already, Blacklist Games put out a second company, Blacklist Miniatures, that has so far done Blacklist Fantasy Series 1, and now they are doing Horror Series 1. And there's going to be more, there's going to be Fantasy Series 2, they've teased different things, I'm sure there'll be more as well. It seems like they're also going to have a sports lineup of different miniatures, but it's basically a whole bunch of miniatures. And for this game system, what we have going on here is we have a board game being developed and kickstarted in tangent together with a miniature line of miniatures, and then you can get those together and combine them and have a board game with miniatures, or you can get the board game on its own, or you can get the miniatures on its own. Lots of different options for you. You can also even get the Fantasy Series 1, although sadly you will have to pay more than people did in the original Kickstarter, which personally speaking I never have a problem with, because I believe in rewarding people who back projects. I believe in rewarding backers for backing stuff. In fact, that's the entire reason why I do these Kickstarter videos on Kickstarters, because I like to talk about the mutual benefit, the mutual gain. Should you back something or not? Are they giving you a reason to, or are they just taking advantage of the fact that you, have FOMO and all that? So, this campaign, this game, let's go through what the game is. Let's talk about the game. I've actually played the game. There's a full gameplay video of me playing it together with Quackalope. So let's talk briefly about the game. Then let's talk about the pledge levels, the options, should you back it, should you not, all that stuff. And to begin with, this is a board game that is developed both by the Sadler brothers as well as together with David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin, who you might know from the Undaunted series as well as War Chest. And if you've played those games, this is going to have mechanics very similar to those games, but developed into more of a I don't know how to define it, I guess, more of an Ameritrash stylings along with it. I mean, we're taking a miniature game style and then combining it with their deck building thing. And if you don't know about those games, a quick overview of them is they have a form of deck building that they like to call more deck management, because what you're doing here, a very common denominator in all three of these games, in both Dire Alliance Horror, in War Chest, and in Undaunted, is the idea that as you develop your deck, you're going to be recruiting cards that will let you activate your units, but the specific cards you recruit will let you activate those units. So you might start with a well-balanced deck of two of each character, but then as you choose to double down on certain characters, certain troops, certain units, you'll be able to activate that unit more often every time that card comes up in your deck. So you're effectively building a deck, but that deck controls the board state and controls which characters you're going to activate and how often. Additionally, a common denominator in all three games is as your characters take damage, what will happen is you will lose cards. So you might develop your 2 cards in your deck up to 5 so that you're activating that character again and again and again, but then when you take damage, you don't track health points. Rather, you lose that card from your deck. It's going to come up less often. It's going to be more infrequent. And so it has this fascinating push and pull to the mechanisms that develops that you start off with a very even spread deck, and then you focus it on certain characters, and throughout the game you're going to further level it up. And as characters get hit, as they die, your deck will become more concentrated and you'll be able to activate characters again and again and again. It's a fascinating interplay. It's a system that has worked very well, as evidenced by the ratings on War Chest, by the ratings on Undaunted, and I have no doubt by the ratings on Dire Alliance Horror as well, because it very much is the same core system, but then extrapolated further to, like I said, a miniatures game. Now, I do want to be clear, I am primarily talking about the battle mode, because Dire Alliance comes with 2 main modes. It comes with a battle mode, a 2-player head-to-head system, in which you're going to be, fighting for different objectives, perhaps area control, perhaps for controlling certain areas, or killing a certain character, or whatever it is. But it also comes with a raid mode, which is a solo/cooperative mode, in which you'll be playing against the board, and it'll be more AI generated, typical cooperative game and all that. I have primarily played that battle mode, so I can't really comment on the raid mode, but the good news is both of these modes are available on TTS for you to play. If you want to give these games a shot, if you want to see if they are for you, check them out on TTS, or check out the host of alternative media content out there. There's a gameplay video from Quackalope and myself in which I get thoroughly beat, although, watch that video, I rolled like ones. It was unbelievable how bad I rolled. Normally I'm not a fan of complaining about luck, and I'm still not complaining, I had a blast playing it, but the sheer horrendous rolls I got in that video, you would think it's doctored. It's that bad. It's ridiculous. It's over the top. I think they have to redesign the game. It's completely broken. Nonetheless, this is a game where you can check out my video, you can check out other content creators, you can see what is a fit for you in terms of whether this game looks like it's for you, or you can just play it on Tabletop Simulator. You'll have to go through the rules. They're not overly involved, especially if you already know War Chest or Undaunted. And that's kind of an overview of the gameplay, of the game itself. And with that said, let's talk about the pledge levels. So to begin with over here, and this is a mixed bag because we're basically selling two different games at the same time. So we have Dire Alliance Horror Pledge for $50, which is going to give you the Dire Alliance board game. We have the Horror Series Pledge, which is for $70, is going to give you the Horror Series Pledge, which initially started at 70 minis. We're already above that. We'll come to that shortly. And then we have for $109 the Complete Horror Pledge, so effectively instead of being $120, you get it for $109 if you buy both together, an $11 discount on getting the two combined. And so basically, let's should you back it, should you not, what's the deal there, does it make sense, or all that. So to begin with, before we get into the actual value proposition, let's talk about the game itself, the game system, because my own opinion, which is basically my own opinion, there's a testimonial on me from the page, or from me and Quackalope, but my own opinion is this is a solid game. I thoroughly enjoyed my play of this game. I do plan on getting this and adding it to my collection. I don't know if I love it, but I do feel it is a better version of War Chest, and well, better is probably the wrong word. I do feel it is very much similar to War Chest and Undaunted, but in a game system, which is to say miniatures and attacking each other and all that, that I tend to prefer. I mean, the characters have abilities, they have powers, they have things that differentiate themselves more than what Undaunted has or what War Chest has. And so it very much is taking an established system that is well rated, well liked, and adapting it to suit my preferences more. I'm not a huge fan of horror. I would have been a much bigger fan if this would have been fantasy or who knows what, but nonetheless, I still like it. I'm still a fan of it. Additionally, like I said already, it very much shares the core of those games. So I'm not just relying on my own opinion here. Rather, I'm relying on the fact that those are both really well-rated games, really well-liked. They tend to fly off the shelves. People are huge fans of that game system, and I think they'll be huge fans of it here. I mean, this is not an untested product, not by any means. This is a game system from a bunch of established designers relying on core concepts and then establishing or breaking it out to a further audience game system or whatever you want to call it. The point essentially being that you're getting a good game. As far as the pledge levels, as far as what you're getting, should you back it, we're going to divide this up into both the miniatures, the Dire Alliance board game, and then both together would obviously just be a better back together, and we'll come to that. So the Dire Alliance miniatures, let's start with that because I think that's an easier one. So to begin with I said to begin with 3 times now, but any case, Dire Alliance Horror Series 1 started off at $70 for 70 miniatures. Now, I will say that as a miniatures product, it's a little bit out of line with my usual knowledge of the secondhand market, of how things play out. It's just not an area I deal in as much. This is a weird hybrid because it's a miniature product along with a board game, so it is an interesting weird line to cross. But the miniatures on their own, $70 for 70 miniatures was the day one offering. I will note that they did not have that giant, deluxe miniature. So if you look at here, we have miniatures after miniatures, we have some Van Helsing inspired stuff, different kinds of miniatures, little sets of miniatures, all this fun stuff, and these very much align with the factions in the game because that's the point. It's a combination of miniatures on their own and then a game system you can use together with it. But they don't have any gigantic dragon at the end, they just kind of finish it off. And what I mean by that is if you pay attention to the Blacklist miniature series, they have that same starting offer over here, miniatures, but then they finished it off with a giant dragon at the end as the piece de resistance to pull you in or whatnot. Now, it's entirely possible, in fact, I would argue probable, that we'll see stuff like that as the horror series develops, as we get towards the stretch goals, towards what's left. We may well see stuff like that. But additionally, factor in the fact that this, if you want as an add-on, if you want to get that Dire Alliance, let me find the add-on section over here. If you want to get that Fantasy Series 1 over here, somewhere if I can find it, over here we have, here we go, Fantasy Series. Over here, $125 for 201 miniatures. That, if you would have bought it in the Fantasy Series itself, it cost you $65 to get that tier. And that's because it is an early adopter, you're literally building a company, you're building a new aspect of the company. They need that early adoption, so they gave you a much better deal. It could be that the new one won't be as good a deal. It could be that it won't be as developed in terms of how many miniatures there are, in terms of the giant miniature, all that. They might have had to compress it a bit to just effectively, at a certain point, you start with one Kickstarter and you build a product line, and then the next one you have to actually start making money because that's what companies have to do to keep their doors open. So you don't see that giant miniature. Additionally, as of right now, they're currently at, I believe, is 105 miniatures as of right now. Meaning they started with 70, they've unlocked 35 more, roughly 35 more with stretch goals, and that's of roughly $120,000 worth of stretch goals. Which means Blacklist Games is one of the few companies, possibly the only company I know of, that does real stretch goals, meaning they set a stretch goal, they have often 5 to 10k jumps, and then they stick with it. They don't constantly expand to these magical inflated numbers that are basically defined to have a rhythm and a flow and a cadence so that they can keep teasing people. They stick with numbers and they give you solid stretch goals. In fact, let's look at some of these over here. Over here, one of the options over here, they have a full set of, over here, 16 miniatures. Is a 5k stretch goal, 165, 170, 175, 180, 16 miniatures, a full new faction for a 5k stretch goal. Because they don't sit there and tease it out over 15 goals. They actually they're just, hey, we have a pace, we're going to reward you. And that is why often their Kickstarters are often one of the few Kickstarters that will also say, we're tapped out. And not like in the last day of the campaign where they're like, oh, we finally tapped out, because at a certain point you have to keep up with that flow. But rather, they'll do it earlier on in the campaign. We'll be like, hey, we have a week left and we got nothing. You guys killed it. You guys killed it. It's awesome. We're great. And so they really have realistic stretch goals. And with that in mind, I think they probably aimed for the same roughly 500,000, maybe a little more because of the popularity, and plus it's a game, who knows. But they probably aimed somewhere for that line in terms of get to 500,000, that's a win. Everything after that, we'll see how it plays out. Meaning, if you math it out, my expectation is that you won't necessarily get around 200 miniatures in this game. I think you're probably looking at closer to around 170. If you just math out how many stretch goals, how many miniatures you got in the first $120,000 worth of stretch goals, how many that will expand out to, I think you're probably looking in the 170 range, and probably fewer of the big miniatures or whatever. So that's what I think will happen. I mean, we'll see, but that's where I think it'll end up playing out, because I think it's not going to be as good a deal as this was. I mean, the Blacklist miniature series was 201 miniatures for $65, which is an insanely good deal for some pretty quality miniatures, all things considered. All things, if you look at their updates over here, they had an update. Look at this guy over here. This is one of their miniatures from the Blacklist series of fantasy series. And so that's where I think that will end up. But nonetheless, $70 for roughly in the range of 150 to 200 miniatures. We don't know where it'll end up. I think that is a solid deal. It's hard to know exactly resale value of miniatures alone, or at least myself. It's just not a market I know very well. But I think it's a solid deal, all things considered. Not as good a deal as the fantasy series, but still worth getting. And it's worth pointing out, all these stretch goals have that little Kickstarter exclusive tag. So hopefully, I shouldn't say hopefully, but they're basically saying it won't be expansions. These are going to be available on the Kickstarter, possibly on future Kickstarters, but it's not going to be available in retail, which means this is probably the best you're going to get. So as far as the miniatures line, I do recommend jumping in on it if you are interested in it. I do not know the secondhand market in terms of selling it, but it's still a pretty solid deal. As far as the board game, it starts off bad, but it gets better. And what I mean by starts off bad is initially it's $50 to get the horror pledge. And what you get for that is not a lot, all things considered. So if we scroll up over here to what you get for the contents of the horror pledge, what you're getting over here is basically this. You get a board game, a board, 6 reference boards, 10 scenario sheets, 13 dice, about 250 cards roughly. I have to double check the numbers, but roughly 250 cards, and then a few tokens, a minion bag, and all unlock game stretch goals. And that's no miniatures. And that's for $50 plus shipping. That is not a good deal when you compare that to anything in this range in retail. If you want to pick whatever other game with similar levels of content, similar levels of whatever, that is not a good deal, all things considered. But this is Kickstarter, which means you can't just look at the base game on its own. You have to look at what was included with that. And as of right now, we already have a ton of stuff because of stretch goals, and they are all Kickstarter exclusive, which changes the entire picture as to whether this will hold its value. So we have a new leader. We have 20 cards for that leader. This is in basically putting out that villain in raid mode. We have 1 token and 6 cards for a new hero. We have a new minion, a new minion, a new minion, a new minion. We have a full new faction for the game. And I would expect to see at least another full faction, possibly as many as 3 or 4 more. I don't really know what their plans are, but I would expect a minimum of 1 more full faction. We have a new leader. We have face off against Legion, I don't know, Legion as a villain. We have another hero, another minion. We have another minion. Basically, we're continuously iterating towards the amount of the number, its sheer amount of miniatures and additional gameplay content they have here for this game. All of it being Kickstarter exclusive. By the time they are done, by the time they hit somewhere in that $500,000 range, we're going to have even more content, mostly seemingly Kickstarter exclusive, and that's all being added to effectively a system that I think people will like. Just based on War Chest and Undaunted alone, I think many others, not just myself, will enjoy and like that game system. And that means I think that this will 100% hold its value, because you're going to, for $50, you're getting a decent amount of content for a good game. Combine that, if you want to get that $109, so if you want to pay $109 to get both, you're getting a pretty decent package of miniatures and board game, all wrapped together in one solid package that I think is 100% worth it. And for sure at the complete horror pledge, I think this stuff will hold its value. And so that's basically it. It's a little bit of a roundabout situation here because of the varying stuff they have going on here, because they have a miniature line and a board game, and then you combine them. I will say I'm not particularly a fan of the concept of having separate boxes of miniatures. That feels like I have to open more boxes than I normally would. But then again, Kickstarter has that problem to a degree anyway, so I don't know how different this really is. But at the end of the day, we have a good game system with established developers, established game system that people will like, with miniatures, with everything else all packed together in a solid game system. And that basically is worth backing. Past that, basically, if you didn't know already, the Fantasy Series did announce that they have a game coming out, The Lasting Tales. They basically announced it in their last update. There's an interview you can watch here, but they talk about the future of Blacklist Games. They talk about what's coming next. They tease different things from their sports miniatures coming up, as well as the Fantasy Series game coming up, as well as Fantasy Series 2. So lots of content is being developed around Blacklist Games. Very excited for them. They are continuously iterating and adding more and more stuff to the things they do as a company. I'm pretty happy for them, and I'm just looking forward to Alter Quest, which I got a shipping notification this week and is due to arrive soon. So maybe an unboxing video. I don't know, but I do like Alter Quest, and it's been a while since my last unboxing, so we will see. And that basically is everything. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, have a good one.